The Middle East is entering a phase where the conflict around Iran is no longer just a series of isolated strikes and is increasingly turning into a broader regional escalation. The United States and Israel continue striking key military and political targets. Europe is moving forces towards Cyprus. Azerbaijan is already feeling the direct impact of the attacks, and both air and sea routes are coming under growing pressure. Against this backdrop, Iran, despite taking heavy damage, shows no sign of backing down and continues to raise the stakes, including through new types of strikes and an expanding attack geography. The main question now is no longer just who can inflict the more painful blows, but how quickly this war will be pushed toward an outcome, and at what cost to the entire region and the global economy. According to the Azerbaijani side, Iranian drones crossed the border and struck Nakhchivan, prompting sharp statements from Baku, including threats of retaliation. This episode matters not just as another strike on the edge of the conflict, but as a signal that the geography of the war itself is expanding. Against that backdrop, Azerbaijan has already begun evacuating staff from its embassy in Tehran and its consulate in Tabriz, showing that Baku does not view the situation as a local incident, but as a direct risk of further escalation. Iran, for its part, denies any involvement, but the crisis itself has already become a political event of regional significance. Strategically, the strike on Nakhchivan looks especially sensitive because of its timing. With parts of the airspace over Iran, Iraq, and the Gulf states now closed, air traffic has started shifting into narrow alternative corridors. Reuters reports that even Azerbaijan Airlines flights had to be rerouted, with passengers to Nakhchivan being transported over land. That is why the theory that this was an attempt to disrupt one of the last functioning corridors between Europe and Asia looks entirely plausible. If pressure spreads to this route as well, the consequences will be not only military but economic. Even fewer available transit paths, higher logistics costs, more delays, and greater strain on the remaining transport hubs. In that sense, Azerbaijan is unexpectedly becoming more than just a neighbor of the war zone. It is turning into one of the key nodes of broader Eurasian stability. After the Iranian attacks near Cyprus, Europe began visibly reinforcing its military presence in the eastern Mediterranean. Spain is preparing to deploy a frigate, while Italy, France, the Netherlands, and Spain itself are moving naval forces closer to the Cypriot direction. This no longer looks like routine diplomatic support for an ally from a distance. As the threat level rises, European countries are increasingly making it clear that they no longer see the conflict around Iran as someone else's regional war, but as a crisis that directly affects their own security. Strategically, this is still a very serious signal. When not only the United States and Israel, but also major European naval forces begin moving into the crisis zone, the region enters a new level of international military presence. That raises the force density in the Mediterranean, reduces the room for accidental miscalculation, and at the same time shows Tehran that the pressure is no longer limited to a single coalition. Even if Europe is still acting under the banner of defense, the deterrence architecture is already becoming broader, which means any next Iranian strike could trigger a far larger response than it would have just a few days ago. According to the Israeli side, Iran has begun using missiles equipped with cluster warheads against Israeli territory, munitions that open in midair and disperse a large number of submunitions over a wide area. Israeli military officials and local media are placing special emphasis on this because, when used against urban areas, this type of weapon increases the risk of widespread damage to civilian neighborhoods and makes defense more difficult even when the main missile itself has already been intercepted. From a military standpoint, this looks like an attempt by Iran to increase pressure not only through range or launch volume, but through a more expanded, destructive effect. In other words, the goal here is not just to break through air defenses, but to make every attack more chaotic, psychologically heavier, and more dangerous for densely populated areas. For Israel, this means the war is increasingly shifting towards strikes where not only the fact of impact matters, but the nature of the munition itself. Against the backdrop of the broader escalation, the United States and Israel continue to deliver increasingly heavy and highly symbolic strikes against Iran, no longer just against isolated targets, but against sites of both strategic and symbolic importance. In recent days, several key elements of Iran's military and political system have come under attack, from major naval assets to the very center of decision-making in Tehran. First, the United States sharply raised the stakes at sea. An American submarine torpedoed and sank the Iranian frigate Iris Dina in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Sri Lanka. For Tehran, this is not just the loss of another ship, but a deeply painful symbolic blow to its navy on a distant axis. Reuters specifically noted that this was the first time since World War II that the United States had sunk an enemy vessel with a submarine-fired torpedo, which means this is no longer about isolated incidents, but about a deliberate expansion of the war into the maritime domain. Almost immediately afterward came another major strike on Iran's naval capabilities. The United States announced an attack on the drone carrier Shahid Bagheri. CENTCOM published footage showing the vessel burning, and U.S. Central Command Chief Brad Cooper stated directly that the ship had been hit and was on fire. At the same time, the most politically consequential blow was the strike on the very heart of Iran's power structure. Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was eliminated in a joint U.S.-Israeli strike, after which a transitional governing mechanism began to take shape inside the country. Around 50 aircraft dropped roughly 100 bombs on a facility beneath a government complex built for Khamenei to manage wartime operations. At this point, the overall picture is increasingly pointing not toward a quick de-escalation, but toward a prolonged and dangerous escalation. On the one hand, the information space is still full of talk about possible contacts and unofficial signals, but the actual political messaging is becoming much harsher. Iran is publicly rejecting any willingness to negotiate on imposed terms, while Donald Trump is no longer talking about compromise, but effectively about unconditional surrender. Against that backdrop, the diplomatic window does not look completely shut, but right now it is clearly narrowing, not widening. The military logic also points to a continuation of the crisis. Israel is not only maintaining the pace of its strikes on Iran, but is also expanding its campaign in Lebanon at the same time. Reuters reports the largest attacks on Beirut and southern Lebanon in years, mass evacuations, and an expanded combat zone against Hezbollah. That is an important signal. The conflict is no longer unfolding like a short operation with a single objective, but as a broader regional campaign with multiple pressure fronts running in parallel. The economic consequences are already spreading far beyond Iran itself. Tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has nearly come to a halt, and J.P. Morgan warns that if the disruption continues, Iraq and Kuwait may be forced to cut production within days. Against that backdrop, markets are reacting nervously, oil prices are rising, and Russian crude is already seeing additional demand. That is exactly why this creates a separate strategic risk for Ukraine and the West. A prolonged conflict could give Russia an additional financial opening. The hope now is that the United States and its allies can press the Iranian regime hard enough and fast enough to begin stabilizing the situation before Western attention drifts away from Ukraine at a moment when the Kremlin is also trying to profit from the new crisis. That is why the main conclusion right now sounds very simple. This conflict is dangerous to drag out. Even if the United States, Israel, and their allies continue inflicting heavy military damage on Iran, strategically it is no longer just the scale of the strikes that matters, but the speed with which this campaign can be brought to a result. The longer this war continues, the higher the cost for the global economy, the wider the regional destabilization, and the more opportunities the West's adversaries have to profit from the chaos. That is why many are now hoping for a fast and forceful end to this phase of the conflict, one that can help stabilize the situation and prevent an even deeper crisis. Subscribe and turn on notifications. There will be more important updates ahead, and we will continue breaking down this escalation carefully and to the point.